depending on whose statistics you believe, somewhere between 100,000 and 2 million times a year, Americans use firearms to defend themselves. And the vast majority of times, that's as far as it goes. The citizen displays a firearm and the willingness to use it, and the bad guy stops. That's called a psychological stop. And the vast majority of stopping, anytime a firearm is used in lethal force situations, the vast majority of time is going to be a psychological stop, where you have convinced the bad guy to stop his attack on you. But you can't depend on a psychological stop. So you need to be prepared to physically stop the attacker. Now, when we're talking about physically stopping the attacker, we're talking about damaging them so that they cannot harm you. They cannot continue their attack on you. And how is that accomplished? Basically in two ways. One is by attacking the vascular system so that you are interrupting their blood supply, preventing them from continuing their attack. So you're talking about, shooting them in the heart, shooting them in the great blood-bearing vessels, and dropping the blood pressure to the point where they can no longer sustain action. The other way that can be accomplished is through disrupting the nervous system. So a hit to the central nervous system. So we're talking about hitting the upper spine or the brain itself. So those are the two ways we accomplish a physical stop. Now what you have to understand is pistol bullets are pathetic at stopping human beings physically. And the vast majority of people that get shot aren't stopped physically, they're stopped psychologically. They've been hit once or twice or 3 or 4 times and they decide they don't want to get shot anymore and they give up and they survive. Somewhere around 80% of people who get shot in America survive. Now a lot of that's because of the amazing medical care that's available to us these days. But a lot of that's also attributable to the fact that these little bullets don't have much effect on something this large. Which brings me to how many times are you going to have to shoot the bad guy? And unfortunately, we're sort of programmed by Hollywood to think that if you shoot somebody, that they will go flying backwards, knocked off their feet. But if we look at Newton's third law, which states for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, for you to hit somebody hard enough with a firearm to knock them backwards, it would knock you backwards when you shot it through the recoil. And if you've ever fired a pistol or looked at somebody that has fired a pistol while they're shooting, the recoil is pretty minimal. A 9mm hits about with the same power as a common brick dropped 10 inches. That's not an awful lot of power. So be prepared for your shot to not work and to need to shoot multiple times to achieve the desired response. Hopefully the guy will give up and you'll get that psychological stop. But be prepared for it to not work and that you need to keep firing until he stops. Let's see what that looks like. All right, now I just fired 6 shots. Why 6? Because that's how many times Michael Brown was shot. And there are some people that were saying that was excessive. I know of many times, many shootings where people have had to be shot many more times. The most horrific one that I'm aware of is one gentleman that had to be shot 33 times in the torso with 9mm hollow points, and he was still fighting the cops that were shooting him. He went to his truck, opened the toolbox, was getting more ammunition to reload his gun, and they finally had to shoot him not once, but twice with 12-gauge slugs before they finally put him down. Now, he was going to die. Those 33 shots in his torso were certainly lethal. But we talked about earlier hitting the, attacking the vascular system, disrupting the heart or the blood-bearing vessels. And you can get a perfect heart shot and the person can still fight on for a number of seconds. It could be 10, 20, 30, 40 seconds, even more, depending on where the heart or the great blood-bearing vessels you hit. So even though you've killed the person, it's going to take them some time to expire, during which period they can still fight and hurt you. Another one that I heard that was pretty bad was in Washington, D.C., where a bad guy got shot through the left lung with a 12-gauge slug. So we're talking something that is very powerful, leaving a three-quarters of an inch size hole through his body all the way through. And he turned and ran 6 blocks to the hospital. So somebody that could run 6 blocks to the hospital, imagine what they could have done if they'd wanted to fight. So shot placement's critical. Be prepared for your shots to not work and to need to keep shooting until you get the desired response. I fired 6 shots because that's how many Michael Brown was hit with, and people say that was excessive, and no, it's not. Actually, I think that shows great restraint on the police officer's part, that he stopped at 6. The typical response is to keep shooting until the gun's empty. And considering that he was armed with a pistol that probably held 13 rounds, the fact that he stopped halfway through shows that he had quite a bit of restraint. Another reason I fired 6 rounds is I wanted to show you how quickly that could be done. Most people think, firing 6 rounds would take, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 seconds, and that, it's a very deliberate thing. But the average person can fire 4 to 5 shots per second. So firing 6 shots would take just over a second. Let's see how I did. My first shot was at 1.63, so that's from me drawing and firing the first shot. My last one was at 2.91. So if we take the 163 from the 291, we come up with 1.3. So it took me 1.3 seconds to fire 6 shots. Not an awful lot of time in the overall scheme of things. So once again, I just wanted to go over the dynamics a little bit of a lethal force confrontation in regards to how many shots will need to be fired. Also the aspect of physical stops versus psychological stops, and that stopping somebody physically is difficult to do and may require multiple shots. I'm Peter Burlingame of the Self-Defense Initiative. Thanks for watching. Be safe out there.